Okay, today is November 7th, 2021. It is a gigantic honor and pleasure to have Bilal Sunni-Ali on the show. Bilal is someone I've long admired and looked up to for his work, dedication, sacrifice, and just for the person and example he is and the life that he's lived and continues to live. Bilal is someone that has dedicated his entire life from his youth to present to the liberation movement to fight oppression. And Bilal was one of the founding members of the Black Panther Party in New York City, a citizen and leader of the Republic of New Africa. Bilal was also a world renowned musician and educator. Bilal was a member of the Gil Scott Heron Ensemble, the Midnight Band, and is a celebrated saxophonist, composer, and educator. Bilal has continued to struggle, support, and advocate for political prisoners. I could go on and on, but let's hear from Bilal. Bilal, thank you again and welcome to the show.
Thank you. First, let me say I seek refuge in Allah against misleading and being misled. And I ask Allah to guide my heart and to guide my tongue, guide my mind as to what I may share this morning. And I pray that what I share is of some benefit to all who be able to listen. And thank you. Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to share with your listening audience.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Looking forward to this conversation. Where were you born?
I was born, like you told me, you're at 135th Street. I was born just a few blocks from where you are right now. I was born in Harlem Hospital, also known as the Butcher Shop. A lot of New York City hospitals had that title, the Butcher Shop, and it's a real advancement in life to be born and survive such a trauma of such antiquated facility, and to come out and live a so-called normal life.
Mm-hmm. And when were you born?
I was born in summer, July 13th in 1948.
Okay, and where did you grow up?
I grew up. Well, first we lived on 141st Street between Lenox and 7th, and I remember fires. A lot of fires, and then we moved from there to the Northeast Bronx, and we moved into the Eastchester Projects, and that's where mainly I grew up, in the Eastchester Projects.
And where were your parents from?
Um, my father was from Roatan, Honduras, and my mother was from Texas. Yeah.
And I've heard you talk about this in other interviews. Was your father perhaps Garifuna?
Yeah, my father was Garifuna. My grandmother, actually, his mother was Garifuna, and she was from Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm.
She grew up in a place called the Bluff in Nicaragua. It's a city. Many people have heard of the city Bluefields. It's a Garifuna city in Nicaragua, and that's where she grew up.
Yeah, there's not as many Garifuna people in Nicaragua as, say, Honduras, Belize, for instance.
Yeah, there's a much larger population of Garifuna in Honduras and Belize, and also there's some in Costa Rica and Guatemala also. But there's a part of Guatemala that had been, well, there's a trade agreement so that Guatemala needed access to the Atlantic Ocean. They needed that to that side of the sea.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually rent a part of Honduras, and a part of the Honduras that they went was the traditional Garifuna area.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's we don't have Garifunas living throughout Guatemala, but
Hmm.
in that part of Guatemala, which actually is Honduras, yeah, we're there.
Yeah, in 2018, me and my wife, we traveled up from Honduras all the way to Belize along
Uh-huh.
along what I call the Garifuna coast
Right.
to try to learn as much about Garifuna history and culture as possible.
Good, good.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
what year was that?
I think it was 2018.
Okay.
Yeah. From
Yeah.
we went from Tela all the way up to um, I guess Dangriga.
Dangriga. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we left out of Belize City, but we went through all the different cities along the coast.
Uh-huh. Good, good.
Traveled by bus and lancha, the little boats
Uh-huh.
to get from Puerto Barrios to Belize. So
Okay, yeah, you came on a boat
yeah,
across. Yeah.
yeah, that was
Okay.
intense. That was
Yeah.
intense to be honest. Yeah, that was intense. It was scary to be honest.
Yeah, a lot of people find, well, I guess once you get used to it, it's not scary anymore.
Yeah,
I guess, but yeah, a lot of people. Yeah, I've been on the boat sometime with people who are not from there,
yeah,
and
it's a small.
sometime when the sea gets kind of rocky, and and the captain will say something like, "Well, just cover your heads," you know, just cover your heads and you won't see it. And they'll
Exactly.
say, "Oh no, he don't want us to see. He don't want us to see we're drowning."
Yeah, I mean, it was a small boat, and the water
Yeah,
was choppy. Um, yeah, it was, but it was
yeah, and you're
wonderful.
going like this.
You go.
Yeah.
Exactly. Did your dad talk to you about his Garifuna heritage growing up?
Actually, no, he didn't. Um, what happened at that? Well, my father came over. The whole family. My grandfather came over to the States, to New Orleans, at around 1910, early teens of the last century. And at that time, there was, it's if you study the history of Garifuna, it's a history of war and people going into exile. And so when my grandfather got to New Orleans, he got papers in New Orleans that said that they were born in New Orleans,
Mm-hmm.
that they were born in New Orleans, and that they were all Roman Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And so they hid their identity. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they hid their identity, and I guess I didn't. I was in my 40s. I mean, I had studied about Garifuna people because some of my cousins would tell me, they would talk about Garifuna people back home, but they would never say that we were Garifuna. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so some of my family, like my grandmother is Garifuna, my grandfather wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I got people in my family. Some are Garifuna, some are not, and and um, and because of the way the British keep control is that they keep different ethnic groups from associating with one another.
Mm-hmm. From
So I don't. They didn't keep my grandfather from associating with my grandmother, and hence we have our family. But but you know, a lot of people were kept, and because of that division, a lot of Garifunas hid their identity
mm-hmm.
from their close friends, and
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of the identity was hidden. And I was actually I was actually in Nicaragua with a friend of mine. A friend of mine, he's a DJ in Nicaragua. His name is Ross Joshua Cash. And when I heard his mother called him, and sometimes your mother call you and you don't answer, so then she call you by your whole name. So she said, Joshua Cash Thompson, come here. And when he stood up and came in, I stood up too because I heard, well, that's my grandmother's name. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, and so you know. So then I'm telling them that, how you come by this name? And she said, well, I told her who my grandmother was. She said, well, that's my aunt.
Right.
And so that's when I realized, oh wow, you know, these people that I've always admired because I've studied about them, studied the history of resistance
Mm-hmm.
in the Caribbean, and I really admired the Garifuna. And
Mm-hmm.
now I realize I'm one of them, you know.
Right.
But that's how I found out, and I was in my mid 40s
Mm-hmm.
at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So then when I come back to Louisiana, and I said to my uncle, I was at you know I was at the hometown where your mother was from, where my grandmother was from, and he says, oh, and so you heard the people say Edie Bianchi, and he started talking to me in Garifuna, and I said, wow, why you never said nothing to me in Garifuna all these years? Nobody never did, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just kind of looked down and said, well, they were, they were hiding all that, you know. I said, well, why hide it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But then I got to understand it's like you want to leave certain things in the past because somebody may be tracking you, and you might be back in a warfare situation,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's why they left Honduras, to
Mm-hmm.
avoid that conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Because
And they're still under attack in Honduras.
yeah, there's still a lot of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
That's why when people say vote for Hillary Clinton, I say, wow, you don't know who Hillary Clinton is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And your son, at least one of your son speaks Garifuna or is learning Garifuna, right?
Yeah, he's learning Garifuna history, and he's learning it at the same time where he's learning uh, Mandinka history, and learning the cross a lot of the culture that's the same, that's right out of Mali, West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's so many distortions. Matter of fact, last night there was something on the internet and I missed it. Um, it was about correcting Garifuna history, because they tell in Belize they tell this story about a, shi- a slave ship got wrecked and people survived and they mixed with the local Indians, and that's where Garifuna came from.
Mm-hmm. And Saint
But it's
Vincent. And Saint
yeah,
Vincent. Yeah.
yeah, but it was like when that slave ship, if that slave ship crashed, maybe because maybe somebody wrecked it, but there was already Garifuna there.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how Garifuna came to the island of St. Vincent, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not how they came. And then we have Settlement Day on the mainland in Belize. But then when you read the stories about Settlement Day, it talks about Garifuna coming over, and then the British had to get interpreters. But the fact that they had interpreters means that there was Garifuna settlements already going on
Mm-hmm.
before the time before the time that the British recorded that some people had come, because what had happened, there was people were in exile. A lot of people were in exile after a major battle. They were in exile on an island called Rotan, where my father was born.
Mm-hmm.
What happened on the island of Rotan? You had people in exile there, and then you had people maroons from Jamaica travel there, and that's where you know So that's where I'm figuring that the Creoles there were Maroons from Jamaica, and the Garifuna there were the ones who were in prison there, but they weren't actually in a prison, even though the British had an actual physical prison there. But the Garifuna were sent there they had agreed to go there and not stay on St. Vincent because they were causing trouble in St. Vincent. So
Hmm.
it was a battle, a series of battles, and they came to a truce, and they decided to leave.
Hmm.
But many Garifuna stayed there. As a matter of fact, the one who was forced to leave was Chatoye, and Chatoye was the leader of the rebellion. But today, Chatoye is a national hero on the island of St. Vincent, even though he had to go into exile. And the people who didn't go into exile, went along with colonialism. Today, Chatoye is a national hero on the island of St. Vincent.
Yeah, and I hope to go to St. Vincent's one day and try to learn more about the Garifuna people.
Yeah, yeah. Please do. I'm hoping to. Well, I'm hoping to go to. We have a family reunion in Roatan, and hope it's going to be in 2022. It was
Hmm.
supposed to be in 2019, but then we had
COVID's messing
the
everything.
COVID situation, and we haven't been able to. We haven't been able to have that reunion. Hopefully, we're going to have it in 2022 on the and it's going to be, and the reunion is going to be in Roatan.
Yeah, that should be amazing. That should be really
Hmm.
nice to get everyone together.
Yeah.
And your mom is from where? From where in
My
Texas?
mom is from Grayburg, Texas.
Okay.
Grayburg, Texas. You might never have heard of
No,
it.
I never heard. Is it near Houston? Maybe.
Yeah, it's not far from Houston.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, it's in that area of Texas. So it's like, yeah, most of the people that I know who are born and raised in Texas, who are born and raised in that area of Texas, never heard of Grayburg, Texas.
And I heard you talk about the Belize Club in Harlem before. What was the Belize Club?
The Belize Club, it wasn't. I don't remember it being a physical place. It was a
Okay.
lot of people. Um, oh yeah, there was a physical place. I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was. But it wasn't just people from Belize.
Hmm.
There was people there from Belize, from people from Honduras. There was people there from Panama. It was people there from the islands, from the Caribbean islands, that all belonged to. I don't know why they chose Belize to identify, but at that time, Belize wasn't a country. Belize
Hmm.
was just the city of Belize, and the territory was known as British Honduras
British
when
Honduras.
we were growing up. It just became an independent nation, like in '81. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's when the independence ceremonies came, and the British flag came down and the Belizean flag went up.
I wonder
But
if the Belize Club was on 130th between Lenox and Fifth Avenue, because they have a Belize Jaguar on the sidewalk, kind of
oh yeah,
imprinted on the sidewalk, and I've
uh
always wondered
huh.
why they had that there.
Wow, I don't know. I gotta come look at that next time I
Yeah,
come in here.
it's on the north side of the street, between Lenox and Fifth Avenue on 130th.
Uh huh.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna ask them. I'm gonna ask somebody. Try to find somebody who's still there. Somebody else with a similar background as mine, who grew up,
Right.
who spends time in Belize, who grew up in Harlem, and who may know about that. Yeah.
And I guess my next question is, how old were you, and how did you first get started involved in activism?
Um. How did I get started? Well. I got started learning about it because my uncle, my brother's sister married a man, Stanley A. Davis, who was an official in the Tiger Division um, of the United Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League. So he was. They had a military wing, and he was in charge of that. Now he has a book out called "This Is Liberia," because he spent a lot of time in Liberia, and so that's when I first. That was my first, you know, I guess from small, like I remember he had a lot of things that he had brought back from. He had these, the beautiful furniture that was made in Africa, you know, and I remember that as being part of his house, and then him talking about the different things that was going on in Africa when he was there, and there were people who were actually still trying to push the slave trade. You know, there were people who were capturing other people and selling them to people. That's why they would say people say it was outlawed in 1850 something. But it was if it was illegal if it was illegal before it was outlawed. Once it got outlawed, then it still continued to be in illegal existence. But he said that was one of the struggles that they had was against those places that were actually capturing people and holding people and selling them off. And I guess this was the 19. I was born in 48, so I guess this was in the 30s and 40s when he was in Africa, 100 years ago, and this was what was going on in West Africa at that time.
Wow.
But so my understanding of the struggle for African self-determination actually dates back to then. I was a part of the youth division in the Northeast Bronx of the NAACP. They called it the Young Turks. And I was actually mainly involved because I was a musician, and I used to play a group. We used to do fundraising for that division, the Northeast Bronx division of the NAACP. Yeah, but because we would do fundraisers, there would always be meetings talking about what we were fundraising for. So there's different activities, and then that was going on in the southern part of the United States. But there came to be a of series of actions against. It was a place, I don't know if they still have it in New York, called White Castle. It's a fast food joint.
Yeah, it's still here.
Yeah. Okay. White Castle would not hire any black people. So this was like in the mid. This was like around 1960 or so. They didn't hire any black people, so there was picket lines, and and we would basically go there and throw rocks at the White Castle. That was our, in the neighborhood. That was our form of protesting against it. We never joined the picket line or did anything that the organization was saying to do, but we would, and then we never went to apply for a job either. We just would, we would just protest against it,
And then,
But that was my first beginning. I said my first beginning activism, against injustice, as I was interpreting it at that young age. Like 12, 13 years old, learning it and responding to it like that. And later, I became involved in while I was in school. When I was out of high school, well, even in high school, I took there was a special clinic at Berklee School of Music in Boston. And when I was up in Boston, I guess that was the summer of 1965. I I didn't experience activism, but I experienced racism. I mean, it was like they had these congregation laws. You couldn't stand more. You couldn't have more than three people or more was not allowed. If you're walking down the street, if you unless you're moving, but if you're standing on the street, there's three people or more, and I couldn't stand it, man. The police would jump out,
Mm.
jump out with the clubs and chase us off the street. We would just be like, well, we just been, we just discussing what we're doing our homework and stuff.
Of
It was a
course.
music school, so
Hmm.
But that was my first understanding of the congregation laws, what they call it, congregating,
Hmm.
and that these congregation laws were put in place to keep black people from congregating.
Hmm.
You know, and so that was my that was my next level of right up front understanding what this is that we're struggling in. And then I became involved in we had when I went to Bronx Community College, we had a we had a we had a school that we used to teach younger children. It was called East Harlem Academy, and then we was dealing with um, housing issues as well. And then soon after that, I joined the Black Panther Party for self-defense. As a matter of fact, I was one of in the Bronx when they came from California. Well, first there was my roommate when I was in college. He was a member of the Black Panther Party, so there was a Black Panther Party. But then when they came from California, I thought it was the same thing, and he said, no, this is a different party. So I joined it anyway, and some of the people that I was I was talking to about joining it, you know, they were thinking the same thing, that this is the party that they already knew about that was going on in Harlem. There was a group called the Revolutionary Action Movement, which was purportedly had started the Black Panther Party in New York, and they were there was a chapter in Harlem, and there were chapters in other places in New York. Um, but that was when I joined the Black Panther Party. It was called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, which had been started by Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton. That's when that's when I got further into uh, housing issues and housing issues, and that's the main thing. We were involved in housing issues and police brutality. You know, struggling against police brutality and recruiting street gangs, and turning them on to politics. That was basically what the initial activity was when
Political
I first
education.
yeah.
Do you recall what year you joined the Black Panther Party?
That was it was like in the spring of 1968. In the spring of 1968. Yeah.
And was I mean, there's a myth that the Oakland was the first Black Panther Party. Is that's inaccurate, right?
No, actually, like I was saying, there was a Black Panther Party. Um, like when I was a student organizer, there was already a there was already a Black Panther Party in Harlem that had been organized by the Revolutionary Action Movement.
And Was there a Black Panther Party before the Harlem chapter?
Um, I don't. Well, that's when I first heard of the Black Panther Party.
Mm-hmm.
Was when my roommate was a member of it,
Mm-hmm.
the Black Panther Party. But that was before Bobby Seale came to New York and
Mm-hmm.
began to organize and recruit for the Black Panther Party of Self Defense.
What about in Alabama? My understanding is that
Yeah.
Alabama.
Well, yeah. In Alabama, you had the first real Black Panther activity, I think, where Bobby Seale often mentions that. He says well, in Alabama, what you had was the Lowndes County Freedom Organization.
Mm-hmm.
It was active in Mississippi too. This freedom organization, and um, they were running candidates, sort of like the first voter registration drives in the rural part of the South was actually not just to register people to vote, but to actually create black candidates, a slate of black candidates to begin taking over the job of running the community, of running the county. So that's when you had the slogan Black Power. That's what that meant. That in areas where we were in the majority, we needed to organize to control that. So that's what that was. The Lowndes County Freedom Organization had black candidates who were committed to the upliftment of the community, and every um, every party had, like in Mississippi, you had the I think the Democrats have the Democrats have the donkey,
Mm-hmm.
and the Republicans have the elephant. But in Mississippi and in Alabama, the the Democratic Party had the white rooster as their emblem, not the donkey, the
Mm-hmm.
white rooster, and their slogan was um, white, you know, vote for the white rooster for white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Lowndes County Freedom Organization had as its emblem a Black Panther,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so and so that's when the emblem of the Black Panther, and so they had the saying was to vote for the Black Panther and then go home. Go home meant go home and defend yourself, because voting registration at that time, I'm talking about 1965, 1966, they were killing people if
Mm-hmm.
you registered to vote. So it meant vote for the Black Panther and go home was the call of the
Mm-hmm.
Lowndes County Freedom Organization. So I think Bobby Seale, there were people. I think one brother was named Mark Comfort, who came from California to help out. People were coming in to help with voter registration. But then when there was this clear self-defense call in the rural Black South, there were people that came from California to help in that regard. And they brought back word about the Black Panther and the Black Panther and the self-defense and the voting to ensure control of the rural counties in the deep South. And that's where Bobby Seale got the idea of using the Black Panther emblem and using the Black Panther as the name for
Mm-hmm.
the party that they were developing.
So did the Lowndes County Black Panther Party come before Harlem?
Yeah, I think it was around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It was around the same time because it was 66 when I heard about it, and when I heard about the it was 67 when when I had a roommate who was a member of the Black Panther Party, and it was and that was 67, 66 when we was hearing about the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, but we weren't hearing about a Black Panther Party.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't call it the Black Panther Party down there. But they used that Black Panther emblem, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the slogan was "Move on over, or we'll move on over you."
Mm.
Yeah.
And what role did Kwame Ture have in
Whoa! Now that's the thing. Kwame Ture, yeah, that's why I think they was working the same thing because Kwame Ture was part of the Black Panther Party in Harlem.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was one of the leaders and organizers of that. But Kwame Ture was also very instrumental in developing the Lowndes County Freedom Organization and
Mm-hmm.
also similar developments in Mississippi
Mm-hmm.
because he was SNCC. Now, this is the other thing that this group I was mentioning to you, the Revolutionary Action Movement, had an alliance with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So there was So I guess when SNCC was involved in developing the um, freedom organizations and developing the concept, the actual tangible concept of Black Power, it was it was the same forces, the Revolutionary Action Movement and SNCC working together to bring this about. I'm glad you asked me that in those set of circumstances because I never put it together in just that precise way as it's coming to me now that I'm answering the question that you asked.
and you talked about that some of the activism that you were involved in New York City was fighting housing issues. Can you give an example of what type of things you and the Black Panthers
Um,
did?
well, we would organize people when there would be well, you had a lot of people that was complaining about rats attacking them and rats attacking their children. No heat in the wintertime. And we would organize people to, don't pay your rent. Don't pay your rent, put the money in escrow, and whatever repairs need to be done, form a committee and do those repairs and let the landlord worry about it, whatever he was going to do. A lot of times the landlord wouldn't put up a big fight, you know. They wouldn't put up a big fight about it. They would just, well, if the people are taking over the building, I'm gonna get out of here. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's rare. Quite frankly, they had probably made enough money off the building. They had
Mm-hmm.
had 10 times their investment already, and that's what we call absentee landlords. They wasn't living nowhere near there. A lot of them were living in Florida. You know, some of them lived in the city, but they didn't live in Harlem. Or they didn't live in the South Bronx. A lot of them, as we come to understand, were living big time, living large in down in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't nothing to take over and have the enemy run. It wasn't like we had to chase them out. All we had to do was put up a strong fight, organize, and you'd be able to run things. Like Malcolm used to say, you get your freedom by letting your enemy know that you'll do anything to get your freedom, and then you'll get it. And that was one example of applying what Malcolm said to the issue, and it worked time and time again.
and my understanding is um, that you all also addressed kind of the drug dealing in the neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, we addressed drug dealing because it was this is like in the mid '60s. It was really apparent to every. I mean, junkies was nodding all over Harlem. You know, it was in plain view. Everybody that could see it. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like they was nodding on the street. They were shooting up on the street. They were shooting up in the alleys.
Mm-hmm.
They would nod. Now you'd see people nodding on the street, and we knew that a thing that was happening that we could see was that there were programs. We called them poverty programs, where there was money that was coming out from the government or from foundations and a mix of foundations and the government, and they would be there'd be no dope on the street. But when paychecks would come out like about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then there'd be dope out on the street. You know, the cats they out there selling dope, and they say, "Oh, yeah, we can see. You can see what this connection is. This is the setup.
Mm-hmm.
The government and these foundations are sending money into Harlem, and they control. It's timed. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's on time. You know, the drugs flow when the paychecks flow. The
Mm-hmm.
drugs flow. So we knew there was a connection, and we confronted that connection, and we confronted about just talking to people. A lot of the cats who sold drugs were our peers, and it was like, I mean, it wasn't like like it became later where it was like, of course they had guns, we had guns too, and we would, sometimes we would snatch the dope, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we would snatch them, those who got dope, or we would find their stash. We'd pour it in the street, to demonstrate to the people that we're coming after this. We're trying to stop this, and that was basically, it was like trying to convince them that what they were doing was harmful to the people,
Mm-hmm.
and then demonstrating to them that you know, we were really going to fight them to keep control, to keep this scourge from further developing in our community. We was going to do what we could. We couldn't stop it from coming in, but we could stop it from you could stop it from selling it on our block or in areas where we had rent strike, for instance, on buildings that we had control of when we from the rent strikes, we would control it, and that would be a rule, you know, no using narcotics in this building. And if we find any stash in this building, it was gonna come out, and we was gonna publicly dump it in the street. You know.
And who was Haji Sahaddin Shakur?
Haji Saladin Shakur, that was we called him Abba. Abba means father.
Mm-hmm.
Because Lumumba and Zaid Shakur, they were two brothers in the community who both became part of the Black Panther Party. Lumumba became the section leader in Harlem. He was like my best friend, and so his father uh, was, Saladin Shakur. He was he made the Hajj around that time. Making the Hajj was a famous thing because Malcolm X had just made the Hajj. I guess the next he didn't make the Hajj with Malcolm, but he made the Hajj like a year or two later, and so he was a leader in the community. We were in late teens, early 20s. I guess he was around 40, and there were several other Muslim men and Muslim women who were active in the community. As a matter of fact, Haj um, Lumumba's mother-in-law, uh, Sister Mariam Samad, had a group called the Sankore Nubian Cultural Workshop, where it was like a cultural group for young, mainly Muslims, to learn about the culture, Islamic culture, and learn about African culture at the same time. And that's what we were doing. Like Haji Shakur, he was traveling to Africa. He was traveling a lot to Africa, and so we were getting clothes from him. Uh, Mother Mariam Samad, she used to make clothes. She made clothes, and she made dashikis and popularized the dashiki, which we used to see Malcolm wear. Not many people was wearing dashikis back then. I'm talking about like 64, 65, 66. So she used to make them, and in the Sankore Cultural Workshop, we used to wear them. Matter of fact, we used to do fashion shows, and a lot of the fashion shows. There was one show that we did. It was based on the story of Prophet Solomon, um, and it was talking about Solomon's court, and she would make all these costumes, um, and we would wear the costumes, and people would. At that time, it was considered costumes for the show, but then we would wear it out in the street and wear it to the shows and from the shows, and so that was helping to popularize uh, African culture in that aspect. But Haji Salahuddin Shakur, of the he was a supporter of the Black Panther Party. He was not only a merchant, that was bringing African goods into the community and teaching about African culture, teaching us Islam and revolutionary nationalism and revolutionary panic, because many of them also were part of the same. Like I mentioned, my uncle was part of the UNIACL. That was the followers of Marcus Garvey. Many of these, many of these uh, Muslims in the community at the time, who were our elders, were also uh, part of the. Some of them had come out of the Nation of Islam, but some of them hadn't come out of the nation. Some of them were part of a. It was a community called the Andanye Allahu Arabic Society, and they were in New York and Brooklyn and Jersey. And one of their emirs or leaders was Sheikh Hashem Jabba, who's the one who actually did Malcolm's funeral. When Malcolm was martyred,
Mm.
a lot of people just stood back from him, you know. So his body was laying there, and we didn't. So it was that this group that Haji uh, Shakur, Salahuddin Shakur, belonged to, that actually performed Malcolm's, washed and shrouded his body and performed the Muslim rites, which was a big thing in Harlem, because we hadn't seen that before. You know, I'm sure it was going on, but but when you're coming up, you know, you don't go into what happens when people die. But
Mm.
it was a big thing what happened when Malcolm died, because here he was a Muslim and nobody was claiming his body.
Mm.
You know, the Muslim diplomats and stuff in the community downtown, they wasn't claiming his body. And the Nation of Islam, of course,
Right.
wasn't claiming his body. And there were other groups of Muslims, who were just acting like, you know,
Mm.
It's just like there's a man dead, and so what? But but this group under Hashem Jabbar became, they actually did his funeral, and then they continued to work with the group that Malcolm started, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. Um, that became that a few years later that became transitioned to what is now known as the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood. They're up on 113th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue. That's where they're headquartered at, and and they and the Jamaat following Hashem Jabbar, they had land in upstate New York. It was a place called Jabula Arabia, and they where they had land and they had a masjid built and they had people living there. And so the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood that had now become that had been originally the Muslim Mosque Incorporated that was formed under Malcolm X. Uh, they worked closely with the Andanu Allahu Arabic Society,
Mm.
and many of them moved up. Many of them moved up into that into that village up in New York.
Wow, I did not know any
Yeah,
of that. And Mariam A. Samad, she was from Lincoln Houses.
yeah. She lived in the it was Lincoln. We used to call it the Lincoln Projects, but I found out it was Lincoln Townhouses. It was Lincoln Townhouses and Minisink Townhouses were like two areas in Harlem that
Hmm.
were, I think it was, forget some insurance company that had created uh,
Hmm.
these these uh, these living quarters up in Harlem.
And Salahuddin Shakur, um, he he actually, my understanding is he had an incredible influence on many of the members of the Black Panther Party.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, Lumumba was my best friend. So of course, when I was organizing for the party, he was one of the first people I went to. I
Hmm.
knew he would be interested in the party. I wasn't going to convince him. I was just going to tell him that this is what's happening now, and like you know, of course you want to get down with this. And so
Hmm.
he started coming, and influencing people to come. Um, yeah, Lumumba he had just been out of jail a few years. He had I think when he was 17, this white sailor, called him a nigger. So
From
he
West.
chopped him. Yeah.
Hmm.
So Lumumba chopped him up with a meat cleaver. Yeah. So and
Hmm.
that's how he went. That's what he went to jail for. He did
Hmm.
about 5 years up in Comstock, New York. And then another friend of ours, uh, Sekou Odinga. You might have heard of Sekou Odinga.
Hmm.
He just he's been out of prison now about 5, maybe 7 years, but he was just a big part of of the um, the tribunal that was held in New York just
Hmm.
a few weeks ago.
Right.
Yeah, his testimony was one of the more prominent testimonies that was heard by the international jurists.
Hmm.
Um, so and he was another one. He was another one that I met him through Lumumba. You know,
Hmm.
I met him through Lumumba, and we had a student organization called Simba, and Simba had a political wing and a cultural wing. And the cultural wing, we worked closely with Sister Mariam Samad and the cultural organization that she had started that I was I was a part of. And so that's and Lumumba's Mariam Samad's daughter, she danced with the Simba dancers, and so that's how I actually got to meet Lumumba uh, through his wife was a dancer with the Simba dancers, and so I got to meet him, and we became we became like brothers.
And my understanding is Saladin also what knew Tupac's mother, Afeni Shakur.
Yeah, actually, Afeni Shakur was married to Lumumba. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
she was in the Panther Party. She was recruited into the Panther Party in New York, and so Lumumba had two wives at the time. At that time, he was, I mean, first one of my peers to have to have two wives. So he had his wife Saida, who we had known before, and then he had um, Afeni Shakur. And then Afeni, when her and Lumumba got divorced, uh, she kept the name Shakur.
Mm-hmm.
She talked to Abba that she wanted to be, she wanted to be Shakur. She wanted to be part of that family, regardless of whether she was still married to Lumumba or not.
Mm-hmm.
So a number of people um, took the name Shakur. Who weren't blood relatives. They weren't Shakur by blood. They weren't Abba's children, but they took the name Shakur. We all consider him like I still to this day call him Abba. My children call him Abba, because he was the father figure for
Mm-hmm.
many of us. Even though we had our own biological blood fathers, he
Mm-hmm.
was still the father figure for many of us that were in the movement, and for many of our children that were in the movement.
And then what happened in 1968 um, that led you to go underground?
In 1968, just as before the Black Panther Party, before we started the Black Panther Party for self-defense, I had had several uh, gun charges, possession of a weapon, which in New York at that time it was pretty serious. It was you know you get five years off the bat for just possession of a weapon. That's not without them even trying to connect your weapon to a crime or anything, just for possession. So I yeah, I didn't return to court. Yeah. It didn't look like I went to court a few times and it didn't look like they were gonna give me probation or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so um then there was a situation where um some weapons was found. We didn't actually have them, but they said that we had them. So I said this wasn't looking good for me. So I left. I didn't believe in the court system. Anyway, I
Mm-hmm.
believe that the court system was crooked and foul, and that you wouldn't get justice. So it was a natural thing for me, and it was a popular thing. I might have helped it become popular, but it became more popular thing to just leave the court hanging.